I want to talk to you this morning as we continue our series on Joseph, and actually the series is called The Dreamer, and the story of Joseph and what has taken place in his life and how God used this young man. And we're in part 5 today, I believe, and you can catch part 1 through 4 if you've missed any of this series. Terrence has all these online for us, so just go online and pick that up if you like. And so the question for us today is simply this. I always like to just throw out a question for us as we begin this morning. The question for you today is this. If you could single out a defining moment in your life that changed the trajectory of your life, what would it be? There may be more than just one moment, but if you could single out a moment in your life, a defining moment in your life that changed the trajectory of your life, what would it be? Yeah, some of you are pointing at your wife, some of you are pointing at your husband. I saw that, Brent. Tina, that's pretty cool that he did that. What would it be? And for some of you, maybe this morning, you might have a difficult time even identifying a defining moment because you compare your experiences, the things that have happened in your life, with the things that have happened with other people in their lives, and you think somehow in some way that what happened to you or this defining moment for you was maybe not as profound as what happened with somebody else. And so you may not write a book about it, but what happened was transformational for you and most likely transformational for somebody else. I love that about God. He never just singles us out and does something for us without him also doing something in a broader perspective for somebody else. And so then maybe there are others of you who've had this supernatural experience. You saw Sasquatch out in the woods, or you took a journey on a spaceship into some other, galaxy, and you experienced the universe in a whole new way, and nobody believes you. Anybody like that, by the way? Just curious. Actually, there are many defining moments in our lives. Having children changes everything. I mean, I know I have 4 children now, 11 grandchildren, and it changes everything. I often tell young parents as they are, kind of rearing children and experience the birth of their first kid, I often tell them, I said, this will change your life forever. This is a defining moment in your life. It changes you forever. Most of us start out when we get married, we have a dog, and we think that changes our life forever. But the reality is when you have your first kid, it changes your life forever. And you have your second, same thing. It changes your life forever. You're not the same anymore. You're not your own anymore. There's been this defining moment, something has taken place in your life that impacted you. That child impacted you, and that child will impact you for the years to come. And not only you, but that child will also impact and influence people for the years to come, wherever they are and whatever they do. Some kids literally change the world. Will it be yours? There's a story that comes out of World War I. I'm not even sure if it's true. I did some research on it. There's a little ambiguity about it, but it's a story that comes out of World War I, and it's about a soldier, and his name is Private Tandy. Anybody hear about Private Tandy? He was standing in a clearing out on the battlefield with a young German medic that was in his sight. So he had his gun trained in on a young man. He had this young man in his sights. He was a young German soldier, and he stopped and thought about this young medic that was in his sights, and he thought about the morals of shooting this injured German soldier. Around him were all kinds of the horrors of war, and it was in full display. But those 2 men stood there on the battlefield, and they were in a different world. And the man in his sights, the legend goes, was Adolf Hitler. It doesn't matter a bit whether we believe or what we believe about the moral implications of the decision that was made that day. But if the story is true, the ramifications of that decision changed the course of human history. That one decision impacted the lives of millions and millions of people all over the world. And it still does today. If the other decision had been made, we may not have even realized its impact. Defining moments in our lives and the lives of others. So we've been talking about Joseph, and Joseph has these defining moments in his life as well. Joseph was a man, he was a man of destiny. He wasn't just a character in the storyline. He was a man who, because he was able to be used by God, changed actually the course of history. And if you read his story or been present for this series as we walked through it over the last couple of weeks, you know that Joseph came from a totally and completely dysfunctional family. How many came from a dysfunctional family? Every one of you did. The reality is, every one of you did, some worse maybe than others. He came from a total dysfunctional family. He had 10 older brothers from different mothers. He was loved by his father more than his other brothers. And in his immaturity, he was a tattletale on his brothers. Anybody ever had a tattletale little brother? Dad, you know what the guys were doing? He was always doing that to his older brothers. He was also arrogant toward them. And when you have an arrogant little brother, that's a really hard pill to swallow. Genesis 37 tells us that he had a dream and that his brothers would one day bow down before him. And in fact, in Joseph's dream, the moon and the sun would bow down before him together with his brothers. They would bow down before him as if to worship him. And in his immaturity and in his arrogance, a series of events would take place that would change the trajectory of his life. At 17, he was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he ended up in the Egyptian Pharaoh's ended up being bought by an Egyptian Pharaoh's official. He was the captain of the guard at the time. And in spite of what was happening there with Joseph, we find in the story that it's constantly said in the scriptures that God was with him and God had blessed him. And in his circumstances, to the point that everything that he did, no matter whether he was in jail or in Potiphar's household or where he was, there was blessing seen. It was like everything Joseph touched turned to gold. And what happened when he was sold into slavery and then ended up in Potiphar's household was that everything in Potiphar's household turned to gold. It was just so cool. Sometimes it's cool to have people around like that who have that kind of destiny. Wherever they are, stuff is good. And this is what was happening in Joseph's life. And so he's a young man. He's about 17 years old. He is handsome. He is really well built. And Potiphar's wife takes notice, and Joseph rejects her advances, and he ends up in prison. But God is also with him there. And before long, Joseph is placed in charge of the whole prison. It's just what happens wherever Joseph goes. And while he's in prison, he's given charge over the whole prison, and he's given charge over the cupbearer and the chief baker. We've been talking a little bit about this over the last couple weeks. He's given charge over the cupbearer and the chief baker of the Pharaoh, who imprisoned them because they had offended him. All right, in jail you guys go. You didn't bake the cookies I like. And as the story goes, the cupbearer and the baker both had dreams regarding what their future was. And then Joseph, with the help of God, is able to interpret their dreams for them. And the interpretation and outcome was good for the cupbearer, but it was not so good for the baker. Remember? Baker was literally hung or impaled. We don't know which one, but it kind of gives, different translations gives you both those options. And the cupbearer was then eventually restored to his position as Joseph had predicted. And Joseph asked him then, when things go good for you, Mr. Cupbearer, when you're with the Pharaoh, please remember me. You ever said that to somebody along the journey of life? Hey, when you get over there, kind of, why don't you let them know about me? And all this had taken place over a period of about 11 years. Can you imagine that kind of circumstance, that kind of struggle for 11 years? Joseph is now about 28 years old. He had been imprisoned for about 13 years, but God had been with him and blessed him in spite of the circumstances that he faced in life. And in Genesis 39, verse 23, it says this. It says, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. I mean, he's in jail. He's been sold into slavery. He's had different circumstances happen in his life that weren't good. But the Lord was with him and blessed him, and he had success in whatever he did. In chapter 39, 3 times it says that God is with Joseph. God had purpose for his life, and that didn't mean everything was going to go good for Joseph or going to go well. It wouldn't mean that all his plans would be worked out like he had hoped that they would be worked out. But God would be with him in all of his circumstances. And I'm sure, I don't doubt in any way in my mind that during that journey in his life, there may have been times in Joseph's life when he dreamed that he had this whole dream, that he dreamed that the dream that he had with his brothers and the whole world would have somehow come to fruition. When is life going to change for me? Yeah, God, you're with me. I can sense your presence, and everything I touch seems to work well for me in certain ways, but it seems like it works better for others than it's working for me. When is this going to change, God? 13 years in prison going, God, when is this going to turn around? Proverbs 16:9 tells us, it says, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord directs his steps. In his heart, a man will plan, but God will direct his steps. And this is what's happening with Joseph. So Joseph is about 28 years old, as I said, when he interprets the cupbearer and the baker's dreams, and that's found in Genesis chapter 40. And after that interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, he asked the cupbearer to put a good word in for him when he ended up back in the Pharaoh's court, and he was hoping that life in some way would get better for him. But guess what? Sometimes when life gets better for us, we forget about those who've kind of helped us to get to the better place. And the cupbearer forgets to share with the Pharaoh what Joseph had done for him. And it's about 2 years goes on. I'm sure Joseph is thinking, man, I wish that guy would speak up. But it's about 2 years that goes on, and the cupbearer doesn't say anything for nearly 2 years. And 2 years later, the Pharaoh has a dream that none of his wise men or his magicians can interpret. And you can find the dream in Genesis chapter 41. In this dream, this is a weird dream, by the way. In this dream, the Pharaoh is standing by the Nile when out of the river comes 7 fat cows. Can you picture it in your mind? Yeah, just hanging out by the Nile, and here comes 7 fat cows. And they start to graze on the reeds there by the river. And then following that comes 7 ugly, skinny cows that eat up the fat cows. And then the dream goes on. Following that comes out of the river 7 heads of grain, healthy, good, growing on a single stalk. And suddenly there are other heads of grain, thin and scorched by the wind, swallow up the 7 healthy heads of grain. But what in the world? If I would have told you that I had a dream like that, you would have asked me how many bowls of mint chocolate ice cream I had the night before. Sometimes God does some pretty mysterious things, but when he does, it would be so important to have someone you know that has favor with God so as to be able to interpret what God is up to. What's going on? And by the way, folks, I just want to share with you this morning, most of the time when God speaks to us, we would often deny this, but most of the time when God speaks to us, it's pretty clear. I've never had a 7 cow eat up another 7 cow, and then grains of wheat, and then the ugly grains of wheat eat up the grain of wheat. I've never had a dream like that. I've never had God speak to me that way. Most of the time when God speaks to us, it's pretty clear. I talked to a woman this week who's in the midst of making some decisions about some stuff in her life. And the reality is they're going to be defining moments for her when she makes those decisions. And I sat down and chatted with her for about an hour. And at the end of our conversation, I just looked at her and said, you know what you need to do, don't you? It's not a question in your mind. You already know. It's so clear. What it is a matter of obedience. It's a matter of actually walking out what we know that God has designed for us. And so most of the time, it's pretty clear. And this happened with Joseph, but most of the time when God wants to communicate, he speaks in a still, small voice in our minds and in our hearts. And all we have to do is get ourselves in a position where we're right with God and we get away from the distractions of the world and we listen to him and he begins to speak. Amen? And when he speaks, it says to us in 1 Kings 9, verse 11, 12, it says, God speaks not in the wind or the earthquake or in the fire, but in the whisper. Most of the time, it's not 7 fat cows. It's a whisper. In Joseph's case, it was a dream, but most of the time, it's a whisper. Most of the time, what God attempts to communicate to us actually is found in the words of the Bible. Most of the time. But Joseph didn't have the Bible. He had these dreams. And so the Pharaoh has this disturbing dream. He does not have a God to guide him because he doesn't know God. He is totally dependent on what is referred to in the scripture as wise men or magicians to guess at what the meaning of the dream is all about. And suddenly then, as the Pharaoh has this dream, the cupbearer remembers how when he was imprisoned by the Pharaoh, that he had a dream also, and a dream about the destiny of his life. And Joseph was able then to tell him what the dream meant. And so, folks, it was always good. It's always good to have a wild card in your back pocket when you are in the service of the Pharaoh. And so the cupbearer says, I think I know somebody. I think I got this guy. And he's thinking maybe Joseph can interpret the king's dream, just like he interpreted his own dream. And so what happens next? Joseph is called in off of the bench, so to speak. He's been sequestered away in the jail or in the prison. But now he is called in off of the bench. He's kind of like the closer, if you will. And so the Pharaoh sends for Joseph. And Joseph gets to have a shower. He gets to shave his face. And he gets to change his clothes. The scriptures actually tell us that. Oh, man, haven't had a shower in a while. Feels pretty good. And the Pharaoh says to Joseph in Genesis chapter 41, verse 15, it says, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph then listens to the Pharaoh and listen to Joseph's response in the next verse in Genesis 41, verse 16. Listen to what he says. He says, I cannot do it. Oh, man, you don't want to stand in front of the Pharaoh and say you cannot do it. He says, I cannot do it. And Joseph replied to the Pharaoh. But then he says this. He says, God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Joseph points the Pharaoh right to God. He says, hey, it isn't me who has the power to decipher strange visions, but God will give you the answer to your question. And so the Pharaoh shares his dream with Joseph. And Joseph is thinking, I would be thinking this if I were Joseph. Joseph is thinking, come on, God, please show up. You know what I mean? Again, this is a crazy dream. Come on, God, please show up. This is pretty weird stuff. I can't do it, but God can do it. Come on, God, you got to show up. Have you ever had those moments in your life, those defining moments in your life when you're saying, oh, God, come on, you got to show up on this one. Come on, God, I need you to show up. Fat cows eating reeds along the river. Skinny cows eating fat cows. You know, the reality is Joseph could have told the king anything. But he heard the voice of God, in a whisper. Hey, Joseph, the fat cows and the 7 heads of grain represent 7 years of abundance. Now store up the overflow, because after the 7 years of abundance, there'll be 7 years of drought. So save up what you can to get what you need to help you through the lean years that will follow. That's pretty cool. That's pretty clear. And so Joseph tells the Pharaoh, and suddenly Joseph is a genius. Suddenly what the magicians and the wise men of Pharaoh's court could not do, suddenly Joseph has done, and Joseph is a genius. Why is he a genius? Because he's really smart? No, that's not the case at all. It's because he was in a position to hear what God would speak. You know, folks, the reality is every one of us can be in that position. None of us are Josephs, but every single one of us can be in a position to hear what God designs to speak. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be smart at all. You just have to be in a position to hear what God would want to speak. And so Joseph had matured a little bit since the days of his youth. He was no longer this arrogant little brother. Years in prison kind of take care of that. He had grown up and learned to count on God when the moments required the wisdom of God. And in the moment when Joseph was standing before the king, he was also, or more importantly, he was standing before the King of Kings. Remember when Pharaoh asked Joseph if he could interpret his dreams, and Joseph said, "No, I can't do it, but God will give you the answer you desire"? That was the defining moment that would change the trajectory of Joseph's life. And not only his life, but it would change the trajectory of his family. And it would change the trajectory of the world. Egypt would survive. Not only Egypt, the nations around Egypt. Not only that, but more importantly, the plan and purpose of God through generations. One moment, one opportunity to stand up and be the voice of God. It would change the course of history because Jesus would be born through Abraham's lineage, the tribe of Judah, of which Joseph was a part. And in Matthew 1:17 it says, "Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah." It's an amazing story. It's an incredible event that happened in the life of a young man who had nothing but heartache and struggle, and yet God was with him all the way through. Folks, one defining moment can change the trajectory of your life. You can be going along doing your thing. You can be just kind of like not even knowing what's coming down. But one single moment can change your life forever. Not only your life, but also the life of your family. Not only the life of your family, but their family and thousands or hundreds or even the world. One single moment. Do you think that Joseph knew which moment of decision would totally change his life? There's no way. There's no way he knew. He didn't know what the outcome would be as he sat with the Pharaoh. He didn't know what would happen as a result of telling Pharaoh the interpretation of his dream. He experienced nothing but hardship from the time he was 17 until he was nearly 30 years old. And then in one defining moment, he becomes the second in command over all of Egypt, answerable to only one person, and that is the Pharaoh himself. "Oh, you told me my dream. Now you're going to be in charge over everything." Everything. Everybody will know you, Joseph. One defining moment. Joseph wasn't a meteorologist. He had no way to predict 7 years of abundance or 7 years of drought. And so here's the deal. There will be defining moments in your life that will change the trajectory of your life. And there may have already been those moments in your life, but the reality is there will be more of those moments in your life. There will be those moments that could literally change your life forever. Often, folks, we seem to try to navigate those moments without the assistance of God. And it's insane to do that. Because our decisions will affect us, and it will affect others in ways that we have no understanding of. The way our lives intersect with others can also be life-changing for others as well. So if I were to ask you this morning, what are the most defining moments in history in your mind? There would be varied responses. Many of them, though, would be hinged on the decision of one person. The wind's blowing through this mic, but it's not the whisper of God. When Joseph told the Pharaoh God would answer him, he had confidence in God. He knew if he were wrong and God didn't show up, he would be dead. So how did Joseph know that God was going to show up? Because while he was imprisoned, he was walking in a tight relationship with God. He was nurturing that relationship with God. During those 13 years in prison for no reason, he spent time with God. He was with God. Everything Joseph touched turned to gold because he was with God. Throughout the whole story of Joseph, through the thick and thin, God was with Joseph. Yes, he was a part of the bigger picture of God, and I want to tell you this morning, so are you. We have this tendency to minimize our lives, as if to say, we don't matter, but the reality is we do matter, and we matter big time. Joseph was a part of this big plan, but you're a part of the plan of God as well. And the question for us this morning is, do we believe it? Through the circumstances of life, are we connecting with God? Are we staying tight with God? Are we holding on to the promise and the hope of God who is present in our life? Folks, every single one of you here today, you were born with purpose, just like Joseph was born for purpose. You weren't born to accomplish what Joseph accomplished, but you will have the opportunity to participate in the defining moments of your life and also in the lives of others around you. You have opportunity to join God in what God is doing in the world. And if you will, it'll change your life and the life of others forever in ways that you could never imagine. I know some of you are thinking right now, oh yeah, I know, but not me. Don't tell yourself that. Well, maybe it's too late. No, it's not too late. It's never too late. Well, I blew it so bad. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. God's grace is sufficient. He'll pick you up from where you're at. And if you'll let him, he'll use you in a defining moment of your life that's literally transforming for you and for people around you.